This video forms the third part of a collection of arguments for 5 further pseudonyms or pen names of the true Shakespeare. The pseudonyms are John Weever, John Webster, Everard Guilpin, Henry Peacham, and John Owen. The first part will elaborate and number some significant arguments for John Weever as a pseudonym of the true Shakespeare. John Weever is best remembered as the author of his first printed literary opus, Epigram in the Oldest Cut and Newest Fashion, from 1599. Be fully aware. Almost nothing is known on Weever's life beyond his works. Not even his birth date or his birthplace are ascertained. Let's justify the assumptions from Weever's 5 works, why he belongs to the multiple pseudonyms of concealed true Shakespeare, involved in a deadly Elizabethan scandal of treason. 1. Is it conceivable at all that sophisticated poet John Weever interrupted his poetical literary career for 3 decades before he continued with a monstrous work on ancient funerals as late as 1631? Is it conceivable at all that an unknown young sophisticated poet and satirist, John Weever, alludes to his contemporary poets, Shakespeare, Drayton, Marston, Warner, Middleton, and others, by revealing us how these not-so-great poets were regarded by him? 3. Is it coincidental that the author allegorically and explicitly begins about himself, telling us about his outstanding genius, even if he didn't slept in Parnassus, nor pledged Apollo's cup of wine, nor kept by the fount of Helicon? No one should dare to carp his epigrams. He shall be carped of none. For who will wrest water from a flinty stone? 4. Is it purely coincidental that the author in his first epigram uses the metaphor of a flinty stone, similar to the true Shakespeare in his first poems, Venus and Adonis and Lucrece? 5. Is it really coincidental that Weever allegorically reflects the key points of his scorned name and life situation, his genius, his fate, his fame? Doesn't this fit, alone, the true Shakespeare? Six. Is it really coincidental that obscure young poet and epigrammatist, in 1599 John Weever, highly allegorically bades 20-1 for Drayton, yet he clearly left his erudition, fled and vowed to live with him, that is, instead of him, since he, the true mirror image, was dead? Do you see it as coincidental that epigrammatist Weever deals in epigram 17 disparagingly with bald-headed Caluus, that is William from Stratford, whom also John Hall in his book Virgidemiarum identified as that crafty cuttle Caluus who lived with a wrong fame when shifting it to another's name? Who may have added this line by hand? Is it coincidental that an expert assigned this manuscript to Weever's epigram 16, a gloomy pun with life and death, is commemorating the death of a male glory, which makes sense as soon as you associate it with the fate of true Shakespeare. Epigram 16. In obitum gloriani. That is, to the death of a male glory. First life, then death. Next death was life before. Death gave life. A life forevermore. Life was not life, till death gave life. Life better. To death for life. Then Glorian is a debtor. This is the absolute key to uncovering of the alleged Shakespeare authorship unsolvability. Human imagination allows not one poet genius both dead and alive. Be aware, life and death did coexist side by side in the true Shakespeare. Is it coincidental that Weever invents a word pun? Epigram .21, with an invented name, George Grave. Be aware that the true Shakespeare wrote under multiple, invented, telling, pen names, such as George Chapman, George Wither, George Sandys, George Grave. The double pun message clearly says that earnest George Grave is not buried. His graveness caused him die. Even grave should go to grave, yet he graveless lies. In Epigram 19, Week 3. Is it purely coincidental that Weever composes an epigram on Brutus, a protagonist the true Shakespeare used in his plays Caesar, who left, who passed, unseen, who find his way, as if his shoes would exclaim, "Stay passengers, and view me." Is it purely coincidental that Weever's epigram 22 deals with William Covell, who published in 1595 the book Polymantia, the lawful and unlawful means to judge of the downfall of a commonwealth, which, without a hint of a doubt, A. represents the destiny of true Shakespeare, and B. has been composed by the same. For details, click link above. Is it really coincidental that Weever's epigram 11 points to a spurious writer, who is not who he purports to be? He is a pen name. His bald rhymes of Venus so taste that Weever dares to swear all of them know the poem. William A. Jones argued that Weever's apparently adulatory Epigram 22 to Shakespeare in fact asserts the moral deficiency of his work. How to explain Weever's intimate early knowledge on Shakespeare's printed Opus 1 and 2? That is Venus and Adonis in 1593, and Lucrece in 1594. Is it coincidental and meaningless that in his epigram 4, Week 4, Weever withdraws after 2 lines his praise on contemporary London bookseller Robert Allott, printer of the Second Folio in 1632, as well as on Christopher Middleton? Is it coincidental that Christopher Middleton's poem, on The Legend of Humphrey, is preceded by 2 poems of John Weever, written on the plan of the Mirror for Magistrates? Do Weever's dedicatory lines to Christopher Middleton's poem, The Legends of Humphrey, really justify this effusive praise of his rather small literary output of 3 works? Could not the prename Christopher Middleton be a useful allegoric distortion of another's prename, Thomas Middleton? Is it coincidental that Weever, under the epigram 10, week 6, to Samuel Daniel, disguises himself with another's author name, Marston, whom he, Weever, praises in the subsequent epigram 11? And that Weever desired, highly allegorically, in praising Marston's spirit, that his own muse would muse, confessing in the end that such wits, that is, his wit, should be admired. Did anyone ever had a second thought, who William Warner might have been? If you consider Warner's title emblem, on his mighty work of Albion's England? Can it be coincidental that the title emblem of William Warner's Albion did appear identical on John Bodenham's Belvedere, in 1600, illustrating allegorically 2 burial mounds? The left, a little further back, decorated by a marigold flower. The right, a little further forward, decorated by a violet. Do you think it really coincidental that the lines in Shakespeare's Pericles, with William Warner's and John Bodenham's strange double grave mound emblem, symbolized by a marigold and a violet, do exist without a deeper connection to the authorship issue of True Shakespeare's destiny? The marigold and violet shall as a carpet hang upon thy grave, while summer days doth last. In 1600, Weever published Faunus and Melliflora, which begins as a poem in the style of Shakespeare's Venus and Adonis, and after 1,000 lines abruptly veers toward satire, with a description of the mythological origins of the form and translations of satires by classical authors. It concludes with references to contemporary satirists Joseph Hall and John Marston, and also to the Bishop's Ban of 1599, which ordered the calling in and destruction of satirical works. Is it conceivable at all that William Weever's poem, Faunus and Melliflora, impressively demonstrates how intimate a young poet's knowledge in 1600 was of the work of Marlowe and Shakespeare? Can it be coincidental that Weever showed an illuminating use of Shakespeare's Love's Labour's Lost? Did Weever in Faunus and Melliflora really borrowed word, phrases, and ideas from Shakespeare? Or was it vice versa? Can it be coincidental, or how do you explain it, why Weever's satire, Faunus and Melliflora, is full of Marlowe's poem of Hero and Leander, registered in 1593, and not of Chapman a continuation, in 1598? Can it be possible that Weever in his satire Faunus and Melliflora borrowed the idea of the nunnery scene in Hamlet from Shakespeare, as Davenport asked, since Weever's satire must have been composed earlier than Hamlet? In 1601, an anonymous pamphlet, The Whipping of the Satire, was published. It attacks 3 figures referred to as the epigrammatist, the satirist, and the humorist. It has been tried by experts to prove that Weever was the author of this anonymous pamphlet and that the three figures were taken to refer to the contemporary writers Guilpin, Marston, and Johnson. These identifications are not only far from certain, they largely lack reasonable logic. It seems more likely that Weever's attack is an allegoric attempt to trickily outperform two pseudo-names, Marston and Guilpin, together with Johnson at their own game, and praise himself by attacking them. The framing conceit of the poetic satire is that the author and narrator on his way comes across two twin-like sisters, the allegorical representations of A the Church and B the State of England. When reading The Whipping of the Satire, the reader should be aware of Marston's, Guilpin's, and Johnson's satires. They are about those satires, and follows them so closely and reproduces their characteristic anger and resentment. Reading the anonymous, The Whipping of the Satire. Must not the supposed author John Weever in fact have been a pseudonym of Marlowe? The True Shakespere. In the introductory Latin poem to the reader, the author closes with the sentence, "I like to please many rather than a few. If anyone does not know me, let him not bother to know me. If anyone wants me, he can have mine." Isn't the anonymous reader revealing himself? Telling us he is famous and pleased many. There is no need to try to know him. Anybody who wants can have it, that is, can read him. Is it coincidental that the anonymous satirist compares himself with a cobbler who shows his dirty satiric fist, that means, who is forced like a smith to obscure his fate? You should be aware of Marlowe's frequent identification with a cobbler's son. Is it not suspicious that the anonymous author uses as a literary style, throughout the satire, Marlowe's unique literary selling point of contrarieties or opposites? Listen. As lesser flame, the greatest smoke we see. As smallest treble is the loudest found. As baddest weeds the soonest grown will be. As empty vessel gives the greatest sound. As poorer purse the prouder stomach still. So weaker reason hath the stronger will. These complementary sentences fit perfect the philosophy of true Shakespeare, Marlowe. They unveil the anonymous author, as Marlowe with his famous self-selected complimentary life motto. On his self-portrait painting, "Quod me nutrit, me destruit." Is it coincidental that the anonymous satirist admonishes himself that he deserves the hanging of, for late libeling? He, who before did bring forth, whole written volumes, and pleased us. Can it be coincidental that the author confesses he wanted to win his audience by Machiavellian policy? Remember that Marlowe opens his play, The Jew of Malta, by letting himself, as Machiavel, exclaim in the prologue,
"Albeit the world think Machiavel is dead, yet was his soul but flown beyond the Alp, and now is come from France, to view this land, and frolic with his friends. To some perhaps, my name is odious, but such as love me, guard me from their tongues, and let them know, that I am Machiavel, and weigh not men, and therefore not men's words, admired I am of those, that hate me most. Though some speak openly against my books, yet will they read me, and thereby attain to Peter's chair, and when they cast me off, are poisoned by my climbing followers. I count religion, but a childish toy, and hold, there is no sinna, but ignorance. Birds of the air will tell of murders past.
Can it be coincidental that the author is reflecting allegorically how the brothers, satire, with his twains, the humorist and epigrammatist, may best succeed to excel the calamity of the author's great disgrace? Can it really be coincidental that the main grief in this poem refers to the author's reputation, his own good name, as well as to the difference between a loss of life and a loss of fame, and eventually, to his shameful fault of his shameless faultiness? Do not these qualities fit again perfectly and only the true Shakespeare, alias Marlowe? Is it coincidental, A, that the author brings his humor to each theater to serve the writ he had put out, and B, even though he favors Pasquale's Madcap by Nicholas Breton? You should however be fully aware, Breton definitely was another of the multiple pen names of true Shakespeare, alias Marlowe. For more details click link above. In The Mirror of Martyrs, or the Life and Death of Most Goodly Martyr Sir John Oldcastle, Lord Cobham, Weever formed the basis of Shakespeare's character John Falstaff, originally called John Oldcastle. There he wrote a rebuttal of sorts to the portrayal of Sir John Oldcastle in the Henry IV plays of Shakespeare. Can it have been coincidental that Oldcastle's martyrdom and treason was introduced casually, and that the name Oldcastle was taken by true Shakespeare without a deeper, autobiographical motive? Weever's Mirror of Martyrs immediately makes sense when considering the true Shakespeare's, that is Marlowe's, destiny. Is it really coincidental that in the fourth stanza of this long poem, in which Sir John Oldcastle is his own panegyrist, there occurs a reminiscence of Shakespeare's Julius Caesar play and Brutus speech, which later served to fix the date of the play? Can it be coincidental that the core issue in Hal's reign as King Henry V was the poetical simile or analogy to true Shakespeare alias Marlowe, whether Oldcastle was a heretic traitor, whose death was richly deserved? Is it coincidental that Sir John Oldcastle has been part of a backlash, and that in Weever's preface he calls it the first true Oldcastle? Be aware, Shakespeare's character, Falstaff, first appeared as Sir John Oldcastle. Doesn't Weever's entire involvement in the Oldcastle story becomes plausible once we recognize him as a pseudonym of true Shakespeare alias Marlowe? having considered Weever's bustling literary activity from 1599 to 1601. Isn't it strange that there was a silence of 30 years? When Weever published his last work in 1631, his Ancient Funeral Monuments. Where and how did Weever spend all his empty years from 1601 to 1631? Is it realistic to assume that Weever abandoned poetry, traveling around England, transcribing and researching epitaphs of funeral monuments for 3 decades before he published it in this volume in 1631? Weever visited Stratford and transcribed the inscriptions on Shakespeare's gravestone and funeral monument in his manuscript notes. Although they are not included in Weever's published volume, the title page states that the book was composed by the travels and study of John Weever. In the first chapter of Weever's Funeral Monuments, entitled A Discourse, Weever deals with the monuments and inscriptions in general. You get the strange impression that Weever's main interest and motive was to enlighten for posterity that his own hidden identity and destiny was of outstanding importance for himself. Follow next examples. Weever explains that he calls all tombs and sepulchres monuments to be transferred to future posterities, by which men have endeavored, even in despite of death, to give unto their fame eternity. For worthiness, books or writings have ever had the preeminence. Vivitor ingenio qui terra mortis errant. I have finished, which neither flight of years and hours, though numberless, can raise. I shall not die wholly, nor shall my best part buried lie within my grave. Thus speaks of books and writings. Reading my wealth in thy better part shall never die. Writings, no age can wrong nor thieving hand. Deathless alone those monuments will stand. My books are read in every place. When their rich marble towers, in ruined dust, shall lie, I shall be read. Idle ears, my verses love. The Scythian fields, my books are read. My lines are sung in Britain, far remote. Conclusion. Those randomly collected numerous inconsistencies about the obscure, virtually non-existent person John Weever and his massive connections with fateful aspects of literary Shakespeare make it compelling that his name must have been one of the multiple pseudonyms or aliases of the only true and possible Shakespeare.